Question number 9, Phil Twyford.
Mr Speaker, my question is for the Minister for Social Housing. Does she stand by her statement that her advice to the Prime Minister about the Salvation Army's visit to Bruce Pulman Park was, and I quote, not sufficiently clear? If so, why did she and her office release the same misinformation to the media?
Mr.
The
Speaker.
Honourable Paula Bennett.
Well, Mr. Speaker, to the first part, my answer is yes, as it was yesterday. And to the second part, it's because we obviously didn't realise that it wasn't sufficiently clear when we made the statement. And after we have that, we've tidied that up.
Tidied it up.
Supplementary.
Order. Supplementary question, Phil Twyford.
Did she tell the Prime Minister that officials from the Ministry of Social Development went out with NGO personnel, including the Salvation Army, to talk to homeless people? And if not, what precisely did she tell the Prime Minister?
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Oh, Mr. Speaker, I haven't got the exact, can't remember the exact wording of what I told him, but it was around this kind of statement. A mobile squad made up of MSD staff and NGOs, including the Salvation Army, has been visiting Auckland City Mission and areas of Auckland to engage with people who may need help with emergency housing. From that statement, Mr. Speaker, you can see that that could have meant that they were going out together, or as I thought it read, was that MSD were going to the Auckland City Mission and the Salvation Army had been going to the park. But at the end of the day, whether they were there together or separately, it doesn't omit from the actual situation, which is that we were going out trying to engage people who are in dire circumstances to make sure that they're getting the assistance that they deserve.
Good answer. Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Phil Twyford.
How does she reconcile her statement, "I have nothing to apologise for," with the Salvation Army saying her mistake has put at risk their ability to help the homeless?
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure, as in most members of this House, have a huge amount of respect for the work that the Salvation Army do with our most vulnerable, and as a consequence of that, as I say, the statements weren't meant to be misleading. all I can do is front up and say that I made that mistake, and that's where it sits. But honestly, you apologise to Chinese, and I'll apologise to the Salvation Army.
Order. Order.
Now we know it's got to.
Supplementary question, Phil Twyford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Order. Order. I'm calling for a bit of discipline from both sides of the House. Phil Twyford. Supplementary question.
Does she accept it's a failure of her government's policy that after 8 years in office, she is pre-booking motels for homeless people and charging them for it?
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr. Speaker, we are the first government to put more than $41 million into emergency housing and give them certainty of funding and make sure...
Order. There is absolutely no point in the Minister continuing the answer. Mr. Twyford doesn't want to hear it.
I'd like to continue my answer, though.
Well, there is no point with that sort of level of noise being raised, and I'm very tempted to... I'm very tempted to move immediately to the next question. There is very little point in SUPs being asked when that sort of barrage occurs. I'll allow the member on this occasion to continue with the supplementary questions, but I expect an answer to be heard with far more decorum than was just a minute ago. Phil Twyford, supplementary question.
Why did she and the Prime Minister work so hard to try and blame homeless people for their plight, instead of doing something credible to fix the housing crisis that she and her colleagues made?
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr. Speaker, I know that the facts don't work for the member, but perhaps he'd like to listen up to some of them. So we are the first government to put more than $41 million into emergency housing, give certainty of those beds and increase the number of beds available, Mr. Speaker. We are the first government to actually be putting that money where it's really needed and addressing those needs as they are, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, good. Question number 10.